Welcome to the Martial Arts Mind Podcast, brought to you by Brooklyn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Go to brooklynbjj.com. That's brooklynbjj.com. Explore the philosophy behind serious jiu-jitsu practice and develop insights into your own training. And now, the Martial Arts Mind Podcast.
My name is Brian Glick. I'm joined by
Gene Dunn.
TJ is
working the boards, as it were.
We thought that today we would begin with a topic that we discussed a few weeks back, an article that had come out of a discussion that you had had with Sifu Vizzio, who is a frequent subject of some of our discussions and some of the writings that we've been doing. And I'll take everybody through the story a little bit, and then we can talk about some of the points that come up and some of the ideas that come up. But you had said that at the end of a lesson the other day, he had put down the mitts, and then he had taken off your gloves, and you had picked up the mitts and the gloves, and you had started to put them away. And you were walking very slowly, and he called out after you. And he said, "Gene, walk faster." And so you had turned to him, and you had said, "You know, Sifu, I had a really rough day today. You know, I'm really feeling it." And I think this is something that, you know, anybody who trains in the martial arts has had that experience of having a rough class and having a long day. And it does seem sometimes like after that happens that you do need to slow everything down. And that's kind of the natural tendency. So he went on to shout after you, "What do you mean? Everybody's having a tough day. And it's not whether you're having a tough day, it's how you are showing it that matters, so you better walk fast," right? And so in the story you said, you know, that's what you did. And actually you ran.
I ran. Yeah. So when a guy like that tells you to move, you move.
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting moment because usually we allow ourselves in times like that a space to relax, and we make excuses, or we start to go through our day and we start to build a case. We get very defensive. You know, we have our position set. This is one of the things that the martial arts traditionally pushes back against, is this notion of like earned leisure. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me when I hear a story like that is that, in fact, the tendency of a lot of people these days, I think, is to consider the martial arts as a leisure time pursuit.
Yeah.
That actually the purpose is to relax you, or the purpose is to distract you, or to take a break from something. And so it's in this moment after everything has already been done. Technically, the class is complete, right? The physical portion of the class is complete. And you're starting to power down. And instead of allowing that kind of experience to be the thing that you leave with, he steps in and he kind of doesn't allow you off the hook in that way. When we think about this and we think about the feeling of wanting to use the martial arts or use a classroom, use any physical activity to then power down a little bit, or to escape, or to step out. Traditionally, martial arts is about discipline. It's about the opposite of that.
Opposite of escapism.
Yeah. So what's that mean?
I was having a conversation with a student last night, and he said, like, I was good in school. I have good parents. You know, I kind of coasted through college. He had good grades, right? Because he was a pretty focused person. He didn't need accountability in that way. He said, as an adult male, sort of out there in the world, if he wasn't careful, he felt like he would drift off. There's too much space to kind of go off into never ever land, if you will. Speaking of escapism, and he really appreciated the context of the way that we're teaching classes at the school as accountability. And I'd said, you know, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage on both the teacher's part and the student's part. Because if you're looking at it from a consumer-based mentality, then the teacher more than likely is not going to tell the student how they really see it, because it runs the line. And they don't want to risk losing tuition. I understand that, right? Like, everybody's got rent to pay. And for the student, like, they have to be really willing to put the right lens on and push into these other areas. And why I say that is because I think Vizzio, I know Mr. Vizzio has a lot of integrity. And, you know, growing up with him, being a young man in his 20s, like the first day he met me, he was like, "You're here for class too early. Go get pizza. You look like a pizza boy." And like, I was 18. I didn't have a context for that. It was like, what's this guy doing? Like, but he saw something there. He immediately challenged me. And he has a way about him. That's why I said, like, when a guy like that tells you to move, you run, because he hasn't compromised that for himself. So what does that mean for me? It means that, and I think you can appreciate this, right? Like, you have a very rigorous teacher yourself, that it's so important to, even as martial arts instructors or even as grown men, to have someone in our lives that holds us accountable and is really kind of pushing the gears. And like, I know the guy has a deep sense of love for me and his world. I just know it. I can sense it. And through that, he knows that, like, if I become too soft, like, what's next for me? Like psychotropic drugs? What's next for me? A bullet in my mouth? Like, we talk about that, right? Like, it's an extreme example, but him and I talk about it. Like, we go through these changes, like someone loses their house, or they get a divorce, or they're on top one day and then all of a sudden it's over. And what's the response? If the response is like, "Yo, I'm just done," you fall into depression. Well, that's not what the martial art's about. You know? So I think there's a very interesting dynamic there. I think there's an interplay, there's a co-creation, if you will. And that's kind of what it means to me. He says it. He says, like, everybody has to have someone in their life that they put a little bit above. You know, our friend Stuart, he's a great Renzo Gracie Black Belt, and John Danaher student, fantastic teacher. I remember him telling me he had a yoga guru who was like this innovative person and was very meaningful in Stuart's development. Very, like, we would talk about him. And I think he went a little bit off the deep end. And I asked Stuart, I said, "How was that for you?" And he says, "It was very difficult, but you know, the guru doesn't have to be perfect. He just has to be put in the position where he can help you stretch." And I think that that's an example of what Vizzio is talking about. Like, we have to have someone in our life, if we're going to be functional over time, that will push us and squeeze us and poke at us. And lots of people can't handle those kinds of relationships, you know. I watch Danaher. I know he's very fond of you. And I watch how rigorous he is. He won't tolerate a lot. Not that you would give him a lot to tolerate, but he's a rigorous taskmaster.
You have a unique moment with this because you get a chance to see his insight, his opinion of your process at that moment. Mm-hmm. Now, you're acutely attuned to that. No?
Well, yeah, I would just add in, like, the landscape is, I've been doing martial arts for 40 years. You know, I think most people after 10 years, I mean, Gladwell talks about the Beatles showing up after 10 years as a success. Like, most people kind of pack it in after 10, right? But after 40, then having someone go, "Yo, move your butt."
So he's there. He's literally over you.
And this happened recently? I thought it was
I see him every Wednesday.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I hope you.
No.
For some reason, I thought it happened like in your teens. And
No, man.
This happened recently.
No, I see him every week.
Holy
and there's
mother
a
of
different lesson every week. Bro, he's... not to go off on a tangent, right? But one of his favorite lines is, "I'm 2 hamburgers shy of magnificent."
What does that mean?
Means
He says it about himself?
no.
Or about you?
About me. He's like, "You're 2 hamburgers shy of magnificent." Like, Gene.
Just give in. Just give in.
Yeah, like have 2 more hamburgers and your belly's going to be magnificent.
Oh, wow.
Like you
Give over to your natural tendencies.
You're pizza boy. But he's so tight-lipped. He won't tell stories, but he gives them because I think he knows that, like, we're martial artists. We're not sport. We're not athletes. We're martial artists to the bone.
Right.
And so he's happy to share some of those insights and those stories so that those get permeated out through us in a way. I mean, maybe I'm imagining things, but that's what it feels like.
Well, you're in the moment with him.
Yeah.
You're getting that feedback.
Yeah.
So
I'm
when
also
he's
getting punched and kicked.
Yeah, but when you're not around, when he's not around for you, when the teacher is not there to poke and prod in the moment, then what? So 40 years in, 20 years in, even 10 years in, the voice is there. Some of these habits have been altered in a way that you can start to go. The guardrail is up a little bit, so you have much less of a tendency to go off the edge. But in this moment, he's there. He's literally standing over you, going, "Yo, listen." When he's not there, or when the teacher is not there, what's the thing that keeps you on track? Anybody on track?
That's a fascinating question.
Because there is something. And I would claim that it's more than just the teacher's voice in the back of your head popping up. There's something else that's happening. So what is that?
Let me ask you, what is it for you?
Well, I think that it's a combination of past experience, like some new guardrails.
Yeah.
As you're, 10 years ago, maybe you would be headed off the mountain. And so now you have a guardrail up. So that takes care of some of it. But I don't actually know. I think that there's something with... I do think if I had to guess, I would say that there is an intersection of physical memory, that the body holds memory in a certain way.
Yeah.
And
it's a beautiful point.
It's an intersection of that physical memory with a little bit of intellectual memory, so like a little bit of kind of chronological memory. The visual of the classroom or the visual of the instructor. But there is this X factor that has to do with the values and the morals and the principles that you have learned without being taught them.
This X factor for me shows up in martial arts stories that he tells. And see, he says some really interesting things. He says, Gene, like, at this point in your practice, you should be able to tell a book by its cover. He's like, I know what someone's thinking by the way they're moving their pinky. Like, if you can't do that by now, then you're not really like training. And I go like, wait, what did that guy just say? Like, and I aspire to get to that level. He tells this story about him camping with Mr. Miyazaki. And they're like horseback riding, and they stop. And Mr. Miyazaki's horse takes off. And he says, Mr. Miyazaki runs after the horse and like runs across a creek. And he swears that Mr. Miyazaki's feet don't get wet. Like, the implication is he walks on water. And I heard that story when I was a little kid. Like, he used to say, like, people want to come to martial arts to get self-defense, but they'll never go all the way to walk on water. And I thought it was hogwash, right? But as a grown man, like, it makes me go like, huh? What? What? I think it's such a deep love for the martial arts and for the infinite ways in which it pushes us or pulls us or makes us advance or kind of drags us down a little bit to be reflective. It's such an interesting metaphor for life, for an effective life, that when I hear those stories, they're so inspiring to me. And I'm like, look, even if it's not true, it's an interesting way to kind of look at how do I push to the next level. Most people can't do the martial arts for the love of it. They have to have an external motivator. And frankly, that's with everything. Just for the love of it. Now, guys and girls, they got to do that stuff, right? They got to have the medals and the belts. But where does this thing take us after that? And for me, you're fascinating in that way because you deeply love the martial arts. I competed. I was at the I was at the world stage when I was 24 years old. I was a captain of the U.S. karate team. I was 6-time national champion. I was, I had to go that route to understand it and then to undo it. But you never did. And so the X factor for me is the question, how did that guy do it? Vizzio was telling me the other day, like, that's part of his kind of thing. Like, he's always like questioning, like, how did that couple stay married for 30 years? Like, or how did that guy invent that new dance step? He likes to dance, I guess. How did these guys do it?
So let me read from the article.
Yeah.
You say, Vizzio went on to say, what you show the world is what matters. That everybody's going through it, but that doesn't mean that you have to show your disappointment or your frustration. That you can still have dignity.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that sometimes we get caught up in showing our frustration because we want someone else to justify our behavior or to excuse it. And, going back to this story, we feel a certain way or we feel disappointed and we want everybody to know that we're disappointed or we're tired without having to say it or without having to actually bring up what that means.
Yeah, I wanted him to powder my bottom because I had a little diaper rash.
So we act out.
Yeah, I know.
And then we put that into how we walk or how we talk or how we engage with people.
They've done studies like people are victimized based on their body language. And that's a real context for the martial arts. Like, don't walk like that because you're going to get targeted. Right? It's nonverbal cues all the way. That's why the posture in the martial arts is so important. Posture in passing the guard, posture in the kata, your head and hips in line. Like, it's all over the place for that reason. But go on.
So, in one way, he's telling you just to eat it. Which is problematic in another way because there is a sense in which burying your feelings of frustration or disappointment or sadness or irritation is also problematic.
Here's where I think is an interesting intersection. My spiritual mentor, her and I talk about something called meekness. And meekness was very important. And as a kid, I heard that word, and I thought it meant weakness. And so, like growing up, I I can remember being like, meek, screw that. I'm not doing that. And it wasn't until recently I looked up the word meekness. And it means, one of the meanings is to suffer without complaint. And see, I think that that's very martial art. At first blush, suffer without complaint, it ruffles the Western mind. It does. Because we're not conditioned that way. But where I'm at right now with it is that what meekness suggests is trust. See, if you suffer without complaint, then you got to trust something. And I think in the martial arts, like for a lot of people, that idea works. Like you got to just trust yourself ultimately. That you got to get right down to it and trust that you will find the solution. And from a spiritual standpoint, like the trusting the higher power or love or the universe or God or whatever you want to say, like I think that's a lovely idea. Because when we start to complain, and I think this is his point, that we interrupt the process, that we subtly interrupt the process of growth, and then we fall apart.
It's still a tall task to swallow the emotional response, initial response. Now you didn't buck it. Right? I hear that in the story.
Well,
you didn't turn on him and say, "What do you mean?" So I get that. But what's the alchemy? Because it looks on the surface like this lead has to get turned to gold somehow. And part of the martial arts process, part of the training, is this thing where you take something that seems like it's one way, and you either make it or you allow it to be made into something else that's valuable. Because take somebody who is, he couldn't say that to anybody get this. He would, but they would walk.
They would walk.
So what is the thing?
The difference now is that I know that I need that. And I say it at the karate school all the time, and I say it in the jiu-jitsu school. Like, look, we're really grateful for the tuition, the time, the effort. It's very meaningful. But if you put the relation, if you consider this relationship consumer based, like you come in for your 2 packs of front kick and your half gallon of arm locks and 2 lotto tickets, you've missed it. And it's very, very important to manage the relationship with the school and by extension the teacher, because your classmates are important in this process too. I don't want to get off, but that if you keep it in the right context, then that's why I think you and I share this love for Japanese martial arts, is because the context is so rich and it has so much for the student. But like, I know, and this is why I brought up Stuart, I know that I need someone above me to grind me out, to put me through my paces, to make me stretch, to offend me, like all of it. The pizza comments, the hamburger comments, the punch me in my gut lovingly. It's not brutal or brutish, but like, or you're moving like you're 90, Gene. Stop it. The difference is that I know I need it. And if I manage that relationship well, I make a hard left on a lot of pitfalls. Because I've been on the other side. I know, like, I've gone, like, in my mid-30s, like, I got this all figured out, like, and then I sunk into the worst. In the worst. You know. Does that answer the question? The guru doesn't have to be perfect. I'm lucky. I have a great teacher. I have many great teachers. But ultimately, it's trusting yourself in this context.
Well, and operating somewhere in the background also is an understanding that you need the sort of discipline, regular discipline that affords self-esteem, that affords self-respect.
The paradox is that I think adults need it more than children in some ways. They're so far away from some of these core principles.
Let me ask you another question.
Sure.
You talked about posture, carriage, bearing in the world as something that is, and we know this, something that's immediately visible. Not always, but often. There's something that you can sense, you can tell, like someone's carriage, someone's bearing. It's not arrogance. It's not that they're holier than thou. It's like a combination of being very relaxed but still totally on point. What does that look like for you? And then who has it?
Well, I can't help but sit here thinking about that conversation we had when you were somewhere around Blue Belt. You know, we were driving after class. You remember saying to me, like, you secretly love knowing that when you walk into a room that you could handle yourself. And that to have this, like, kind of ace in the hole, if you will. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but I think it colors it very well. If someone's really doing it, it looks loving. A man or a woman, like with the right principle, is upright, has carriage, or like is able to carry weight with them, and then uses that and is very kind and very loving in their interactions. That's what it looks like to me, man. That's what, like, I don't know, I was looking out the door and there was a couple outside and the guy was yelling at the girl for putting water bottles in the trunk. He's like, "Why did you do that?" And I thought to myself, like, I said to TJ that, man, the world is just so harsh right now. It's so violent. And the courage or the strength, or the flexibility to have a loving, compassionate, gentle reaction or interaction, I think, is how it really looks like. That's what it really looks like to be a martial artist. Weishaba talks about it. Weishaba talks about, the founder of Aikido, talks about, like, the real path of the warrior. And it's very different than what most of his contemporaries, or even most of what we think about in terms of martial arts. It's very, very different. I have to give a dig, but, like, I think that Weishaba would not have put on a pair of Daisy Dukes and 5-ounce gloves and, screamed obscenities at another human for money. I just don't think that. Now, some call it entertainment, but I think that where, you and I stand in the matter is that ain't martial arts. It ain't real martial arts. And, like, if you're a student of the martial arts, don't be hypnotized. Call it what it is. Because there are real martial arts practitioners out there that like, we're in process too, right? Like, I'm not stainless, I'm not spotless, but we do love the thing for our lives.
Back to the article. In my daily life, I know that I don't want to let somebody inadvertently put me in a bad state. It would mean that I'm not in control of my own emotions. And that's why in training, if someone's moving awkwardly or strongly or weirdly, we can still fight the urge to bite back with force. A good response is to rest in the gap between their awkwardness and your intention. And that is control. And that preserves our dignity. So this is some insight. This is another light on the same topic.
Yeah, man.
This is what it looks like.
Listen, I had this conversation with a student on Wednesday night. Like, him and I have been like working. He's a lovely man. He's really working hard in his life. I really respect the guy. He's doing it. He's a martial artist, and we're working on the intersection between being gentle in the practice and being on purpose. And he still flip-flops. When another person is putting a lot of pressure, he still has the fear response and is biting back with a lot of aggression. And I'm like, yo, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we've been talking about. We want to be relaxed here with the right response. And, you know, at the end, he got hypnotized by it again. And he was with a bigger partner, and I could see him going very, very hard. He didn't like it. And after class, I pulled him aside. I says, you know, that's not acceptable anymore for the level of practitioner you are. And he's like, I don't know what it means. And I said, look, you got to look at where in your life this is incomplete. This is a mirror. And I could see him kind of process. And he said to me, yeah, you know, growing up, my dad used to punch me with his left hand in my face. And I was like, yeah, there it is, right there, man. And it cracked open for him. And I think that, like, there are so many ways in which the practice uncovers and reveals these places that need work, that need light, that need principle. And I said to him, I says, yo, if you think that that's not playing out in other areas of your life, you're stoned. And, you know, he trusts me a lot, right? Like, we have a very deep teacher-student relationship. And I just, like, lately I've been thinking about this idea of, like, we're slaves to our aggression. We're slaves to it. We cannot see out of it. He loses, on some level, his dignity again. It plays out again in this way.
You know, you shared that story about driving me home. I know you love to share that story, but actually I don't like it. And I don't mean this to say, like, don't share it anymore, but I'll tell you what I mean. That actually the point of this, as you're sharing with about this student, is the point is actually it's not control of other people, it's self-control that then can manifest in that way. And I think ultimately that was the thing that was appealing to me. It was like excavating. So it's like a photograph of an excavation that's incomplete. But that's fine.
This was my point to you, that is part of the process. That, right, when you finally relax into the idea that you're safe. And that's how I interpreted the story.
Yeah.
When you finally relax into the idea that you're safe, that you don't have to even interact in the world with, like, fear anymore.
Right.
And that's the beauty of the damn martial arts. Like that's what it does. I remember being like 30. Bro, I used to be so anxiety ridden. I had OCD. I tell the story, right? Like, I had 2 years of my life where I don't remember. They're black. They're the black years. They're erased. And, like, I used to think every single day, like, I'm going to get into a fight. What if I get into a fight? Why is that guy looking at me? Wait. Hey, I was an adult man. I was like, and then one day, I was like 36, and I woke up and I realized, oh crap, I hadn't had those thoughts in about 2 weeks. And it was gone. And so that was a pivotal point for me. Now, I still had a lot of work to do, but once I could give up that fear, then that's why I said, like, what does it really look like? It looks like showing up with a straight back, a metaphoric integrity, uprightness, and then being kind and being gentle and being harmonious. That's what the martial arts looks like, man. The black eyes and all that stuff aside, like, what's the purpose? So when you say, like, it was a moment, I disagree, man. It was a moment of, oh, I got this covered. What's next for me? And I don't think people go that far. I think people go, I got this covered. I'm either out, I'm either out,
right.
Or what's next for me is I'm going to express violence and express more force and what I believe is, for me, was a very destructive quality into the world. And then,
I had that moment that Professor had about 5 months into training. It's something I talk about with people all the time. That was such a pivotal, amazing moment. I left the dojo, sat in my car, and for me, I grew up in Gravesend, Avenue X. It was crazy in the 70s.
Yeah, the son of Sam killed someone.
Yeah,
there, right?
I know. It's Avenue X. It's Avenue U. It's the same crew. It's just a different neighborhood. And all we did was fight. And all I did was fight and look to fight and get in fights. And it was always... It was that I sat in my car and I reflected on, I never knew how to throw a punch. I was one of the so-called toughest kids you ever knew, bro. There's stories about me and my friends, and because I know as a man looking back what we were. It was fear. It was it's always fear. Based on fear.
Always.
Right? So, but then when I said, oh, wow, this is the way you throw a punch. I didn't know how to throw a punch, or you lead with a jab, chin down, basic.
Yeah.
Basic stuff. But 5 or 6 months into it, I had this moment where I was sitting in my car and these guys walked by, and I looked at them like, because they were eyeing me down, and I just came out of class.
Yeah, men love to do that, right?
Right, and they're eyeing me. Yeah, it's that thing that we do, right?
Yeah.
And I had this thought in my mind. You have no idea. It was for the first time, and I was in my my early 40s.
Yeah.
When I first started training, and I said, oh, you have no idea what I can do. And it was only after 5 months, because all I needed was a jab cross.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to see it coming.
Yeah.
Especially from a guy who's in his mid-40s. You're 30. You have no idea.
Yeah.
And then that moment, and then there was another moment in a bar, and then there was another moment where this guy was actually physically coming at me on a golf course.
Yeah.
Me and a bunch of fat dads on a golf course. And this kid thought we took his golf club, whatever the case may be, but he came at me. It's one of my favorite stories, because for the first time in my life, there was zero fear. For me, I diffused the situation immediately.
Gorgeous.
Right? Because that's what you taught us.
That's what we do.
Diffuse, and then there was no violence involved, but that calmness. It was almost like I had the ability to start thinking for...
If you didn't have that calmness, that thing would have gotten away from you.
Escalated.
I'll tell you what I love most about the story is your courage to start a deep practice in your 40s.
Right.
That to me is really the hallmark of the martial arts. Like having a place that you can do that safely.
Yep.
And then being the type of man that is willing to put all of it aside to have a teacher or to have an experience like that. Because it has a profound impact. Profound. If that thing would have gone awry, like, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows?
And you have the ability to walk into a room, and I always say a bar because that's usually where guys are hyper, especially the alpha guys,
Well, I think you're a child of, what was that movie with Patrick Swayze? Roadhouse. Yeah. That's in the back someplace.
Just a slightly more inarticulate and Brooklyn accent type of Roadhouse, but Roadhouse. But yeah, so that's my little input.
It's good important. Because I think it's interesting. You're right in a lot of ways. It's a place at which people stop in two ways. It stops the way that you used to be doing things. It's another way of looking at it. But then people get up to the edge of that, and then that's it. And that's as far as it goes. And so it's
really so accurate.
You know, people talk about like leaving it all on the mat. Right? That's what people say. Yeah. And what they mean by when they say that is, I'm all in. But actually, it's half. That's only half of the work, if it is even half.
Right, they're
the work.
all out of the other stuff that's important.
Well, and so now we're talking about now extending this off the mat.
Yeah, you know, it's really fascinating. Like, I still do it. I still do it in areas of my life. Like, not so many people know this about me, but like, you know, I don't like to sleep without the TV on. And I was looking at why, and it's because I don't know, like I have this deep fear that something's going to get me in my sleep. It's bizarre, dude. Like, I told my mother, I was like, if someone walks into my apartment, like,
they're going to go deaf.
Yeah, right. Like, they're going to be so scared the moment I offer them tea. They're going to sit down and we're going to have tea, and that thing's going to be over. Because I look like, you know, the missing link. Anyway.
You belong in my family. You're a family of cavemen. Don't worry. You're in the right place.
But it seems like a kind of odd thing, but it's in there for me. Like, I don't know, because of the way I grew up and because of all the trauma, like, I don't like it, man. I'm afraid of it. And it's very real for me. So, like, I'll run up to it, and then I'll run. I get right up on it. And then I run away. I get right up on it, and then I run away. And I think that, like, one of the things that you've said that's so important and is so accurate is that we must stay in the problem. Like, you know, like I've watched you train with the very best in the world. And you know, everybody touts you as one of the best. Like, you're known around the world. And I've watched you sit in very dangerous problems, heel hooks, triangles, whatever, from some of the best in the world, and just figure out the solution. And I think it's a really important part of the martial arts. It's you know, it's very, very important to stick in the problem. And that's what people talk about in terms of the mat.
Great book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Mm-hmm. Chogyam Trungpa was a Tibetan monk. He was actually an abbot. He was one of the initial proponents of like Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan culture, right? So he's got a bunch of books. Anyway, so this is one of them, and inside of it, there's a Q&A. He's speaking to a group. And so one of the things that he's talking about is this spiritual process. What I'm going to read, I think, has some bearing on what we're talking about. As someone says, so you're ambitious, you're building all the time, and the more you think about it, the worse it gets, which is to say, like, your progress, in your spiritual progress. Like, you never really feel like you're there. You're always kind of backsliding, and what you start to see are only your shortcomings. So you try to just run away from the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You try not to think about it. Mm-hmm. Try to lose yourself in all sorts of escapes. Mm-hmm. What does this mean, and how can one get over the fact that the more one thinks about it and tries to find out about it, the worse things become, mm-hmm. and the more conceptualizations accumulate? What do you do? Mm-hmm. So his answer is, that's very obvious. You drop searching for anything at all. You stop trying to discover anything or trying to prove yourself. Now, on the surface, it sounds very like nihilistic, like you just kind of stop doing what you're doing. But I think the key to it is this idea of trying to prove yourself. You stop doing what you have been doing. But anyway, so the person asks again, but sometimes one might have an active feeling of running away, and that is not the same thing as doing nothing at all. So this is it. Once you try to run away, you find that not only are you being chased from behind, but there are also people coming towards you from the front as well.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Eventually, there is no room to run.
Yep.
You are completely trapped.
Yep.
The only thing to do, really, is simply to give in.
Yep.
It means to stop trying to go anywhere, both in terms of getting away from and of running to, because both are the same thing. I think in the context of martial arts training, in the context of the experience that TJ was talking about, in the one that you shared about me, and even back to the original article, the story about trying to get away from something, the answer, I think, at some point has to become that you have to give up holding on to whatever it is that you are holding on to. Like, you have to, at some point, come to terms with the idea that the thing that you've thought was north is not true north. If the compass were working, you would be pointed in the right direction. You would know where to go, and you would know where not to go.
Yeah.
For TJ at that moment, for me at that moment, and even I think a little bit for you in this story, but elsewhere, it's the moment where you go, okay, I know that I have the compass. It's like that's better than thinking that you don't have any sense of direction.
I don't know if you remember, but you got me this birthday present once. It's a picture of the three of us, you, myself, and Danaher, and you had it autographed. And he wrote, "Our way is control that leads to submission." And those martial arts, jiu-jitsu people, MMA people that are following him understand that he's principle driven, and that the principle doesn't really fail us. And so when I think what I hear in this is, and this is what my spiritual teacher and I work on, is that there is no place to go. And really, we work out from the truth rather than up to something. And when you look at that, the compass ain't broken. Our lens looking at the compass is off. And so, her and I talk about, like, it's actually John Coquinos, who was my first mentor, and I talked about this. If you were doing a math problem and you started out in the wrong place, if in your math 2 + 2 = 3, not 4, no matter how you did any other equation out from that point, you'd always come up with the wrong answer. And 2 + 2 still equals 4 in the universe. You just had the wrong lens. You weren't looking at it the right way. And Ashigarami and Trap Triangle and Kimura have been in the martial arts for eons, for a long time. But it eluded us for so long because we were force-driven. And it took Danaher's genius to kind of look and go like, wait, it's impossible for the human body to move without exposing one of these things. And likewise, it's impossible to... I was talking about enlightenment in the class today. Enlightenment doesn't have to be like sitting on a mountaintop radiating the golden glow. It can just be like a beacon of light in the world. Like, don't be a douche. Like, that's enough. That would be great. For me, that would be great. But to kind of start from the right place, from the right perspective, is so critical. And for my life, and I think a lot of people have to experience this. Like, they got to experience a a certain level of defeat, a certain level of like chaos and inharmony to go like, wait, what? Is this really what it's all about? To kind of start to question, all right, what's the right approach?
Look, let me bring you back to the beginning of the story. You're tired. Class is over. You're going, oh, I had a tough day.
See, Vizzio knows that that's not a true expression of mind.
And my contention is that in that moment, the relative compass is broken. The absolute compass may be working.
The perfect way to put it. That the relative compass actually doesn't exist. It's an illusion. And the spiritual or the absolute compass is actually the only thing operating. And that is the genius of John Danaher. And it's like this absolute. It doesn't fail you. And Vizzio knew that. Vizzio held me accountable. He goes, you know better than that, Gene. You know that that's not an expression of the martial art mind, of the big mind, capital M. Now, hop to it. Hop to it.
This has been the Martial Arts Mind Podcast, brought to you by Brooklyn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Go to brooklynbjj.com. That's brooklynbjj.com.
Together we will stand, guided will fall. Come on now, people, let's get on the ball and work together. Come on, let's work together. Now, people, say now together we will stand. Every boy, girl, woman, and man. People, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you travel was things all uphill, work together. Come on, let's work together. Now, people, say now together we will stand. Every boy, girl, woman, and man. Oh, yeah. Oh, look at here, look at here. Sometimes